Back in 2010, Carlsen and Nakamura were in Moscow for the World Blitz Championship. After a mediocre performance by both players in the event, Carlsen asked Nakamura to play 100 Blitz games after the closing ceremony. Although they didn't quite make 100 games, this match turned out to be a pivotal moment in the Magnus-Hikaru rivalry.
You and Magnus played a private game, 40 games of Blitz in 2010 in Moscow at a hotel. This sounds and just feels legendary. Final score was 24.5 to 15.5 for Magnus.
The reason that I probably should not have agreed to play this match, and why I very oftentimes reference it as one of the biggest mistakes in terms of competitive chess that I made, is specifically because it gave Magnus a chance to understand my style of chess. At the time, I actually had pretty good results against Magnus. I think maybe he was up 1 or 2 games, but there were many games where I had been pressing close to winning against him prior to that match. When I went and played that match, there were a few things that happened. First of all, Magnus really started to understand my style because we played all sorts of different openings. And so I think he understood that at times I wasn't so great in the opening, and there were many openings where I would play slightly dubious variations. Secondly, from my standpoint, the problem that I realized is since we were playing with an increment, there were many games where I was close to winning, and he would defend endgames amazingly well. He would defend what are technically drawn endgames, but where I would have like an extra pawn. It would be like rook and bishop versus rook and knight. Say I have 4 pawns, he has 3 pawns, endgames of this nature. So for me, after that match, it wasn't even so much that I lost the match or the margin I lost by, but it was the fact that I realized how hard it was to beat him.
So here we arrive at the first critical moment in this game. Carlsen blunders by playing king to f6, allowing Hikaru to throw in a check and pick off the loose f4 pawn. Now, the question is, what should have Magnus done in order to retain his advantage with the black pieces? Very counterintuitive. He needed to actually play this move king to d4, moving forward, allowing checks and all sorts of threats. Maybe white could set up a mating threat by playing c3, and that mating threat could very quickly become a reality. If you were playing against a lower rank player and they played something like e3, now they were thinking, if I play e2, I'm going to be able to promote. I could even under promote with check if I was feeling super fancy. That would be disastrous. Now white has mate in 1. So how do you keep your advantage here with the black pieces? All you have to do is play knight to f5, disrupting the all-seeing eyes of the rook on the 5th rank. And this allows the king to escape, and you still get to keep your 2 passes, basically win the game. Unfortunately, Carlsen didn't see that, and the game continued. So to me, it looks like Hikaru resigns here. He lets his clock run down, and there's simply no way Carlsen would agree to a draw in this position. Especially considering black's advanced pass pawn, white's vulnerable king, and the associated threats of knight to c2 check. On face value, Hikaru's resignation makes complete sense, which is why it is so shocking that the engine actually evaluates this position as equal. So why exactly did Hikaru resign in this position? Well, let's take a look at the most obvious threats. After Carlsen played knight to d4, he's threatening to capture the rook on b5. And if you get greedy from Hikaru's perspective and just capture the a5 pawn, now we start to get a little bit of a sense of how dangerous this position is for white. For example, knight to c2, and now the white king is in a world of hurt because all of these moves are forcing. Nothing you can do, you're getting checkmated in the corner. So taking on a5 is really not an option. And in fact, in this position, after Carlsen played knight to d4, there's only one move that saves the game for white, and that is to play rook to e5. So here you still allow black to play knight to c2 with check, but it's not nearly as potent because you can no longer push e2. If you push e2, you can just capture, and after exchanging rooks, this is basically still a draw. In fact, if anything, white's ahead here. So that's certainly not going to work. So what does black need to do? Black needs to defend the e3 pawn by simply playing rook to d3. But after rook to d4, it's going to be very difficult for black to make any meaningful progress with these two passed pawns. So let's take a look at what the engine would do if it was playing itself with perfect play. We'll get a little bit of a sense of how equal this position would be over the next 30 moves. Okay, so this is about 40 moves after the position we just saw. And here you can see Carlsen is still up a pawn's worth of material, but it's really, really difficult to convert. The engine thinks this is a complete draw. So back to the final position here, you really would expect Hikaru of today to find this move, rook to e5. But unfortunately, he didn't and just gave up instead, which is really interesting. And I think it's also particularly interesting that this series of matches had such a big impact on him, considering that maybe he wasn't playing at his best at the time. They had been playing in the early hours of the morning. Apparently, they had been drinking the night before. So I just find all of that kind of context makes this game even more interesting and something that you would really never expect Hikaru to do. Guys, that is a wrap. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts, comments, do leave them in the comment section below. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.